It was a cold spring night in 1994. Streetlights flickered over a quiet Moscow backstreet as a black Mercedes pulled up to a familiar doorway. Inside that car sat one of the city's most feared underworld figures, a man whose name made club owners pay fees without a word and made rivals disappear. Hours later, both he and the Mercedes would be gone. No body, no witnesses, no ransom note. Police arrived to find nothing but a half-smoked cigarette and a faint oil stain on the pavement. Within days, rumors swirled, an inside betrayal, a daring escape, a secret deal with the state. Did he flee with millions, or was he silenced forever? 3 decades later, the case still refuses to die. Declassified files, whispered testimonies, and one chilling piece of evidence, kept hidden for years, paint a picture stranger than any crime thriller. Tonight, we're diving deep into the disappearance that shook the Russian underworld and still keeps investigators awake. Stay with me, because by the end, you'll see why some detectives say this mystery was never meant to be solved. The king of the 90s streets, the Moscow night was restless, buzzing like a live wire. Neon signs blinked over smoky cafes, and music from underground clubs spilled into rain-slick alleys. In this electric chaos, a single name could hush a crowded room. People lowered their voices when they mentioned him. For years, he had been the quiet storm behind the city's fastest fortunes. Now, as we step back into that world, it's hard not to feel the charge in the air, the sense that anything could happen, and usually did. Back then, the early 90s felt like an endless gamble. The Soviet system had collapsed almost overnight. State factories stood silent, and the rules everyone had grown up with simply vanished. Overnight, streets filled with new traders selling anything they could find, foreign jeans, imported cars, even chocolate bars from far-off Europe. Money flooded in, but so did trouble. Rival groups fought over every market stall, every parking lot. The police were underpaid and often looked the other way. In this free-for-all rose a man whose charisma drew loyal followers the way a magnet pulls iron. Let's call him Victor, for the sake of the story, a figure stitched together from dozens of real underworld legends of that era. Victor began as a small-time hustler, flipping electronics from a beat-up van. But he had a gift. He read people fast and made deals faster. Soon, he was supplying entire blocks with goods no ordinary shop could stock. Those early profits bought him cars, contacts, and most importantly, protection. Protection meant survival. Competitors might smash your stalls, or worse. Victor built alliances with former athletes, big men with quick reflexes who now found steady work guarding nightclubs. They respected him because he paid well and never lost his cool. By the time the rest of the city caught on, Victor had stitched together a network that reached from street vendors to import-export firms. Every step of his climb was wrapped in theater. He hosted lavish dinners in restaurants that barely stayed open a month. He tipped waiters enough to feed a family for weeks, and he never raised his voice in public. Even rivals admitted there was something hypnotic about him. Some said he could talk a furious debt collector into sharing a drink instead of drawing a weapon. By the mid-90s, Victor controlled not only the nightclub scene, but also lucrative car import routes. This was more than glamour, it was strategy. Imported cars were a goldmine. He arranged shipments from Germany and Japan, slipping past customs with paperwork that looked impeccable. Each shipment meant another layer of wealth, another circle of people who owed him favors. Yet power in those years was like holding a burning coal. The faster you grabbed it, the sooner it could scorch you. Victor had enemies in every district. Small crews envied his earnings. Larger syndicates feared his growing influence. Street whispers said some groups tried to lure him into traps. Still, he seemed untouchable. Deals closed, money flowed, and police inquiries fizzled out like weak fireworks. People close to him remembered an odd mix of warmth and calculation. He might share a midnight meal with drivers and guards, then slip away to negotiate million-dollar ventures by sunrise. Friends spoke of loyalty as his highest law. If he promised to back you, he did. That reputation brought more allies and more risk. Each new partner meant another possible traitor. All this built toward the single night when he would vanish. But in these early years, no one imagined such an end. Victor's life felt unstoppable, like a movie set to a pounding soundtrack. He moved from smoky back rooms to glittering parties without losing the calm in his eyes. And yet, even during his brightest days, faint shadows gathered at the edges. Competitors were keeping ledgers of grudges. Law enforcement agencies were gathering thin files, each memo marked confidential. Old friends sometimes left without notice, heading for safer cities abroad. Victor noticed every shift, and those who knew him say he began to tighten his circle. He trusted fewer people, spoke even less about his plans, and often changed cars 3 times in one evening. The city itself was changing too. What began as a wild gold rush was hardening into territory ruled by heavier players, business barons, ex-security officers, and silent investors who preferred to stay off the front page. For someone like Victor, every triumph meant stepping deeper into a maze of secret deals and fragile alliances. As we follow his rise, remember that every empire carries the seed of its own collapse. Victor's success was dazzling, but it depended on the very forces greed, loyalty, and sudden violence that would later pull everything apart. And so, the stage was set. One man at the height of his power, a city humming with danger, and countless eyes watching for the smallest crack in his armor. All it would take was one night, one unexpected turn, to turn triumph into mystery. Next, we move closer to that critical evening, following Victor into the hours that led to his final known drive. The night forever remembered as the night of the Mercedes. Night of the Mercedes rain polished the city like black glass that evening. Streetlights cast long, trembling reflections on the wet asphalt. Inside a quiet restaurant on a side street, Victor raised a glass with his closest companions. Laughter and low music floated in the air, but anyone watching him closely might have seen something different. The distant look of a man running calculations in his mind. The dinner stretched late. Plates of roasted fish and thin slices of smoked meat appeared and vanished. According to the waiter, who later gave a statement, Victor's mood was relaxed, even playful. He joked with his bodyguards, tipped generously, and took several short phone calls. Nothing hinted that this night would be any different from countless others, but subtle signals emerged if you knew where to look. One guard remembered that Victor kept checking his watch and stepping outside for fresh air. Another noticed a small black envelope slipped to him by a courier who left almost immediately. Whatever message it contained, Victor read it, folded it with care, and placed it in the inside pocket of his jacket. He said nothing. Near midnight, Victor suggested a drive. He preferred late-night cruises when the city emptied out. The rain had eased to a mist, and the streets were nearly silent. His sleek black Mercedes, polished like a mirror, waited at the curb. Witnesses agree on this. He left the restaurant with 2 companions, though their identities remain uncertain. Some accounts say a trusted driver was at the wheel, others insist Victor himself slid behind it. From that point, the trail begins to blur. Security cameras were still rare in the mid-90s, but a handful of key locations had them. At 11:27, the Mercedes was recorded turning off a main avenue onto a narrow industrial road. At 11:38, it passed a second checkpoint camera, and then nothing. No camera ever caught it again. Investigators later retraced every possible route. They questioned night shift workers, gas station attendants, and residents of nearby buildings. No one remembered seeing a black Mercedes stop or speed by. There were no skid marks to suggest a sudden stop, no shattered glass, not even a dropped cigarette butt beyond what was found near the restaurant. Victor's last phone call came at exactly 11:42, based on tower pings. The brief conversation with an unidentified contact contained nothing unusual, just a reminder about a future meeting. After that, silence. His phone never connected to another tower. For a city used to constant movement and noise, this clean disappearance was almost supernatural. How does a car simply vanish? Theories multiplied. Some imagined an ambush on a deserted road, with the car quickly hidden in a warehouse. Others believed the Mercedes had been switched for an identical model, the original already dismantled and shipped out of Moscow. His friends were among the first to panic. By early morning, they began calling hospitals and detention centers. No one had seen Victor. When they finally contacted the police, precious hours had passed. Officers arrived at the restaurant around dawn, gathering half-remembered statements and searching the route. They found only one faint clue, a damp oil stain near a loading dock several kilometers away. Whether it belonged to Victor's Mercedes could never be proven. The absence of a ransom note deepened the mystery. In most abductions, someone eventually demands payment. Here, there was only silence. It was as if Victor and the Mercedes had been erased from the map. Old associates later recalled an uneasy feeling during those first hours. Some spoke of a hidden meeting scheduled for that night, one he had not shared with his usual circle. Others believed he received a warning and left voluntarily, staging his own disappearance. Each account contradicted the next, and the fog around those critical moments only thickened. As daylight spread over the city, news of Victor's absence began to circulate in whispers. Market traders, nightclub managers, even rival groups sensed something extraordinary had happened. The man whose name once kept entire districts in line was suddenly nowhere to be found. This is where the mystery hardens into legend. One night, one car, and a trail that stops like a cut wire. No farewell notes, no final messages. Just a black Mercedes driving into history. But while Victor seemed to vanish, the world he ruled did not pause. The ripple effect of his absence would set off power struggles and uneasy alliances. To understand how the city reacted in those first feverish days, we need to see what unfolded immediately after the disappearance, the chaos described in the next chapter, Vanishing Point. Vanishing Point, Moscow, woke to an uneasy quiet. Morning papers carried no hint of trouble, but in the hidden corners of the city, word was spreading fast. Victor's black Mercedes had not come back. By breakfast time, his closest partners were on the phones, voices tight and sharp, calling hospitals, police stations, even small roadside cafes along the highways. Each call came back the same. No accidents, no arrests, no sightings. At first, some friends clung to hope. Maybe he had decided to rest at a private dacha, the kind with thick pine trees and no phone lines. But as the hours passed, that hope thinned like fog in the sun. Victor's routines were legendary for their precision. He never missed a scheduled meeting without a reason, and he never left associates guessing. Police became involved only after repeated pressure from his inner circle. A patrol inspected the streets between the restaurant and his last known phone signal. They found nothing but ordinary night debris, cigarette butts, wet cardboard, a lost glove. The single patch of oil discovered near an industrial loading dock was tested and retested. No link to the missing Mercedes could be proven. By noon, investigators mapped every possible route the car might have taken. They drove those roads themselves, noting every turn, bridge, and warehouse entrance. None showed signs of a struggle. No shattered glass, no broken guardrails, no skid marks that might hint at a sudden stop. Forensic experts checked drainage canals and riverbanks. Again, nothing. Cell tower data brought more puzzles than answers. Victor's final call at 11:42 pinged a tower near the southern freight yard. After that, the phone went dark, as if the battery had been removed. In those years, location tracking was far less precise than today. But even with a wide search radius, not a single camera or witness matched the time frame. Rumors spread faster than official reports. One theory claimed that a professional ambush had been staged with military precision, involving a second identical car and false license plates. Another suggested a clandestine meeting with state security officers, a conversation that never returned him to the street. Some whispered about a hidden underpass leading to an old Soviet warehouse where a vehicle could be dismantled in hours. Each story added to the legend, but none explained how everything vanished so completely. Friends described the emotional whiplash of those first 24 hours. One moment, they felt certain Victor would call with a simple explanation. The next, dread hit like a sudden drop in temperature. Calls to his family and trusted aides all returned the same nervous uncertainty. No one had heard from him. Even the wider criminal world seemed stunned. Rival groups who had tracked his every move expected to hear of a shooting or a fiery crash, something dramatic, something public. Instead, they faced an empty stage. Without a visible end, it was impossible to know whether Victor was dead, hiding, or striking a new deal in silence. As night fell again, the disappearance began to shape behavior across the city. Some of Victor's nightclubs closed early. Business partners delayed shipments, fearing unexpected inspections. Bodyguards who once walked with easy confidence now checked mirrors twice and kept hands near their jackets. It was as though an invisible tremor moved through the underground economy. Police officials tried to calm speculation. A brief press statement referred to an ongoing missing person inquiry, but avoided the word kidnapping. Behind closed doors, detectives debated more urgent possibilities. Could this be an escape, planned to the smallest detail? Had Victor discovered a plot against him and slipped away under their noses? Or had a rival eliminated him in a way that left no trace? Whatever the truth, one fact was clear. The disappearance broke the rhythm of Moscow's criminal landscape. It was not just that a man was gone. An entire network of influence, money, and silent agreements suddenly hung in midair. Like a spider's web cut in the middle, every thread quivered. From this vacuum of certainty, a storm of fear and opportunity began to rise. Allies, competitors, and law enforcers all rushed to interpret the silence for their own gain. The next days would see frantic movements, hurried meetings, and secret deals, an underground world scrambling to fill the gap left by a man who might still be watching from the shadows. What unfolded next was more than panic. It was a full-scale shift in power, a reshaping of hidden empires. To see how the city reacted, and how Victor's name became an even larger force in absence than in presence, we step into the next chapter. Panic in the underworld. Panic in the underworld. The morning after Victor's disappearance, Moscow's underworld felt like a city holding its breath. Street markets opened late. Club owners who usually boasted of connections now spoke in low, clipped tones. Everyone was waiting for a sign, any sign, that the man who kept a fragile balance of power was still alive. By noon, the whispers had hardened into tension. Victor's network stretched across nightclubs, import businesses, and entire street markets. He was the quiet broker of dozens of unspoken agreements. Without him, each handshake deal suddenly looked shaky. Crew leaders, who had once been allies, started guarding their own corners, afraid that someone might strike first. Inside smoke-filled back rooms, emergency meetings unfolded. Senior lieutenants sat around cheap plastic tables, chain-smoking and trading rumors. One insisted that Victor had been taken by rivals from another district. Another swore he'd arranged a secret escape to Western Europe. None of them had proof, but every theory carried real consequences. If Victor had been killed, retaliation might be expected. If he had fled, someone else might try to claim his territory. Money was the first to feel the shock. Weekly protection payments, usually delivered with clockwork regularity, slowed to a trickle. Some merchants kept the cash hidden, fearing they might pay the wrong side. Others quietly shifted their business to competing groups, just in case. A few brave traders simply stopped paying altogether, testing whether anyone would come to collect. Rival crews sensed the opening. Scouts appeared near Victor's best-paying markets, not yet making a move, but clearly measuring the ground. They spoke politely to shopkeepers, asking subtle questions about who was still collecting fees. It was a careful dance. Nobody wanted to provoke Victor if he suddenly reappeared, but the ambition in their eyes was unmistakable. Police attention also sharpened. Detectives who once treated Victor as untouchable now smelled opportunity. If his network weakened, long-pending investigations might finally yield arrests. Plainclothes teams quietly shadowed his known associates, hoping someone would lead them to the missing man, or at least to incriminating evidence. For Victor's inner circle, the pressure was worse than any direct attack. They faced two impossible choices: act as though he might return and keep his empire intact, or assume he was gone and defend themselves. Every move carried risk. Show too much independence, and you could be accused of betrayal if he came back. Wait too long, and rivals might swallow your territory. Old alliances began to splinter. One key lieutenant was rumored to have left Moscow within hours, heading for a safe house in St. Petersburg. Another started discreet talks with a competing syndicate, offering information in exchange for protection. Friends who had once shared victories now watched one another with narrowed eyes. Meanwhile, the legend of Victor only grew. With no body and no confirmed crime scene, his absence felt almost supernatural. Bartenders told stories of a secret plane waiting on a dark runway. Dockworkers swore they had seen his Mercedes roll onto a freight ship bound for Turkey. Even taxi drivers joined in, claiming a mysterious passenger had paid in cash for a ride to the Belarus border around the same time. The chaos even reached the upper echelons of business and politics. Some officials, who had quietly benefited from Victor's ability to keep certain districts calm, worried that uncontrolled turf wars might spill into the open. Backroom conversations hinted at emergency arrangements to keep markets stable, arrangements made in a hurry and never written down. Through all this, one fact kept haunting everyone involved. Victor himself had always planned for chaos. He was known to change routes, use decoys, and keep safe houses across the city. Was this upheaval part of a strategy only he understood? Or had he truly been removed from the game? As days turned into a tense week, no ransom demand arrived. No credible sighting surfaced. The silence became heavier than any threat. It was as if Victor's very absence was now calling the shots, forcing allies and enemies alike to reveal their true motives. In the middle of this storm, investigators finally stepped forward with a more formal approach. What began as hurried patrol checks would grow into a full-scale Investigation 1 that would dig into hidden bank accounts, suspicious meetings, and high-level connections. To understand how official scrutiny deepened the mystery rather than solved it, we move next into police on the back foot. Police on the back foot. Before dawn on the second day, a thin drizzle fell over Moscow's grey rooftops. In a dim police office near the garden ring, a duty officer pinned a brief note to the log. High-profile missing person. Possible organized crime connections. It sounded routine on paper, but the name on that note carried weight far beyond a standard case. Detectives knew Victor's reputation well. He was the invisible broker who kept several competing crews from open war. Approaching such a disappearance meant walking through a minefield. If they moved too fast, they could spark violence. Too slow, and they might lose every lead. The first challenge was simple timing. Hours had already slipped by. Victor's companions had waited through most of the night before alerting anyone, hoping he'd call or walk through the door. Those lost hours mattered. Streets had been washed by rain. Possible witnesses had gone home, and any trail of the black Mercedes was cooling fast. Investigators split into small teams and began their circuit of questions. The restaurant staff described the late dinner in careful detail, but disagreed on whether Victor seemed anxious. One waitress swore he laughed the entire evening. Another insisted he looked distracted, stepping outside more than once to smoke. Security footage confirmed little. The only camera on the block caught Victor exiting, but the image was blurred by water streaks on the lens. Patrol officers drove and redrove the known route between the restaurant and the southern freight yard where his phone last pinged. They scanned underpasses, river embankments, and abandoned warehouses. No tire marks, no broken glass, no sign of forced detours. Even the faint oil stain near the loading dock, their one possible clue, yielded nothing definitive after laboratory tests. Then came the paperwork maze. To trace the car, detectives needed the official registration records. But when they requested the Mercedes VIN from the Traffic Bureau, a curious obstacle appeared. The file was marked temporarily inaccessible. No one could explain why. Some clerks muttered about a system upgrade. Others hinted at a higher-level hold. Each explanation felt thinner than the paper it was written on. Frustration seeped through the ranks. One senior investigator privately admitted that every promising lead seemed to vanish behind locked doors or convenient coincidences. Phone records suffered similar gaps. The last call at 11:42 was easy to confirm, but requests for related tower data returned incomplete. Was it sloppy archiving or deliberate interference? No one could say. Meanwhile, the city around them churned with rumor. Newspapers caught wind of the story and published fragments: mystery disappearance, possible gang conflict, while radio talk shows speculated wildly. Detectives suddenly faced a double pressure: solving the case while keeping public panic at bay. Press briefings were careful, almost bland. They called it an ongoing inquiry, avoiding words like kidnapping or murder. Inside the investigation, disagreements grew sharper. Some argued Victor had staged his own escape, citing offshore financial activity and his habit of planning multiple exits. Others believed in a clean professional hit, carried out with inside knowledge and resources beyond ordinary gangs. Every theory demanded evidence, and evidence remained stubbornly out of reach. Adding to the tension was the quiet presence of state security. Plainclothes agents from higher agencies appeared at briefings, listening more than speaking. They asked narrow, precise questions about Victor's political contacts and foreign bank transfers. To seasoned detectives, their interest hinted that Victor's life might have crossed paths with something larger than black market deals. Days stretched into a week, and the official investigation risked stalling. Yet investigators also knew that pressure from above was building. They were expected to deliver progress, not mysteries. Underneath the routine of interviews and reports, a sense of being watched grew stronger. As one officer later put it felt as if someone else was playing the game, and we were just moving pieces. Despite the silence, one fact became undeniable. Victor's disappearance was not just a criminal puzzle. It had become a political one. Each unanswered question, missing car records, incomplete phone logs, sudden bureaucratic roadblocks pointed toward invisible hands at work. This realization set the stage for the next darker line of inquiry. If ordinary investigation could not pierce the fog, perhaps the answer lay beyond ordinary crime. Whispers about secret deals and hidden state involvement grew louder, leading straight into the next chapter. Shadows in high places. Shadows in high places. Night after night, the city hummed with gossip, but inside certain government offices, the tone was quieter and colder. Victor's disappearance had already shaken Moscow's underworld. Now it was creeping into the realm of politics and state security. Detectives working the case began to notice unusual visitors at their briefings, officials who never gave their full names, men in plain suits who asked sharp, narrow questions and then disappeared as quickly as they came. The first sign of hidden influence surfaced in a single sentence buried inside an internal memo. Parallel inquiry to continue under separate authority. No explanation. No contact person. Just a vague instruction that effectively allowed another, unnamed agency to conduct its own investigation without sharing results. For experienced officers, that phrase might as well have been a locked door. Whispers about Victor's ties to high places had existed for years. He was known for cultivating friendships across every spectrum of power, business magnates, minor officials, even retired intelligence officers who appreciated his steady generosity. But now, those old connections looked different. What if one of them had become more than friendship? What if Victor had been useful to someone in government, perhaps as an occasional source of information or as an unofficial channel for hard-to-trace funds? Investigators began hearing stories that sounded like spy fiction. A former customs clerk recalled that Victor's shipments sometimes passed inspection with unusual speed, as though someone had waved them through. A retired security officer hinted without naming names that Victor might have supplied tips about dangerous contraband moving through Moscow. Nothing was written down, of course. It was a world of handshakes and quiet favors. Financial clues added to the intrigue. Bank transfers surfaced that led beyond ordinary offshore havens to accounts known for intelligence operations. One account in Cyprus, opened just days before Victor vanished, was linked to a firm used in several covert funding operations. Could these have been emergency escape funds or payment for a final service rendered? Inside the police team, opinions split sharply. Some detectives believed Victor might have been approached by state security to become a secret informant. Perhaps he had agreed, and his disappearance was the first step in a carefully planned extraction. Others suspected the opposite. that he had refused cooperation and paid a heavy price. Both theories explained the sudden vanishing of surveillance footage and the curious gaps in official records. A few high-ranking contacts quietly fed more combustible ideas. According to one late-night conversation recorded in a detective's notebook, certain economic reforms of the era created secret slush funds managed through trusted intermediaries. If Victor had helped move such money, he might have known details too sensitive to risk in open court. That knowledge could have been either a shield or a death sentence. All the while, the city's criminal circles kept a wary distance. Some believed Victor had entered a witness protection program under a different name. Others imagined him sipping coffee in a quiet European capital, supported by government patrons who found his silence convenient. A few claimed he was still inside Russia, hidden in a facility only a handful of officials could access. The deeper the detectives looked, the stranger the coincidences became. Witnesses who once promised to testify suddenly forgot key details or left the country. Paper trails dissolved behind reissued IDs and vanished companies. Even simple requests for traffic camera backups met with technical malfunctions. It felt less like ordinary bureaucratic delay and more like deliberate fog. And yet, no single piece of evidence ever proved state involvement. There were only overlapping circles of influence, each pointing in several directions at once. It was like trying to follow footprints in a snowstorm. The harder you looked, the faster the trail disappeared. By now, a quiet tension filled every meeting room. Investigators understood that if government interests were entangled in Victor's life, pushing too hard could backfire. Some files were left half-written, others marked for internal use only, and progress slowed to a careful crawl. Still, even hidden forces cannot erase every trace. Money leaves marks, and financial currents often tell stories more clearly than whispered rumors. As weeks passed, a new lead began to glow faintly through the haze. Unusual offshore transactions, timed with uncanny precision. Following these invisible rivers of cash would open the next crucial line of inquiry, explored in the coming chapter. Money trails and offshore mysteries. Money trails and offshore mysteries. Long after the first frantic days had passed, the mystery of Victor's disappearance refused to settle. Street rumors burned hot, but inside the quiet offices where serious detectives worked, another kind of heat was building, a paper trail of sudden money movements. When classic detective work stalled, investigators turned to what criminals and financiers alike rarely escape: banking records. It began with a single, irregular transfer spotted by an analyst combing through currency reports. Just 2 days before Victor vanished, a company linked to one of his import businesses had moved a sum worth several $1 million, converted to hard currency, into an account in Cyprus. At first, it looked like a routine overseas payment, but a closer check revealed that the receiving firm was a shell with no staff, no offices, and only a rented mailbox. From there, the money jumped to an even murkier destination in the Caribbean. That was only the start. Over the next week of research, investigators found a web of accounts stretching from Liechtenstein to Singapore. Some belonged to Victor's known companies, others to entities that had never appeared in his portfolio. All of them had one thing in common. They had been activated or heavily used in the 2 weeks leading up to his last night in Moscow. Bank managers remembered nothing unusual. Most of these transfers were made through encrypted faxes and private couriers. One particular account drew special attention. It had been dormant for years, holding a modest balance. Suddenly, on the morning of Victor's disappearance, it lit up with deposits from several different sources. Within hours, Those deposits were transferred again, split into dozens of smaller sums and sent across multiple borders. It was like watching a magician's hands blur money appearing and vanishing faster than anyone could follow. Such moves could mean two things. Either Victor himself had planned an escape so carefully that he activated hidden resources at the perfect moment, or someone else, someone with access to his deepest financial keys, had done it for darker reasons. Both options suggested inside knowledge. Detectives dug into the backgrounds of financial middlemen who handled these transfers. They found familiar names, former accountants from Victor's early ventures, a lawyer who specialized in offshore registrations, even a retired banker who had once been investigated for laundering profits from art sales. Questioning them proved frustrating. Most insisted they knew nothing about Victor's fate. A few admitted they had received instructions through intermediaries, but claimed those instructions were legal and routine. The pattern of the transfers raised even more questions. Instead of moving funds in one big sweep, the network used a tactic known as layering, where money is broken into many small, quick steps to make the origin impossible to trace. Each hop passed through jurisdictions famous for banking secrecy. Experts explained that building such a system required months of preparation and trusted specialists. In other words, this wasn't panic-driven behavior. It was choreography. Meanwhile, associates on the street reported subtle signs that Victor had expected a major change. A week earlier, he had casually mentioned wrapping up some loose ends. He had also shifted certain valuable properties, nightclub shares, car import contracts, into the names of long-time confidants, almost as if arranging inheritances. Some read this as proof that he knew danger was near. Others saw it as smart bookkeeping for a man planning to leave. The mystery deepened when a Swiss banker, contacted unofficially, revealed that an account matching Victor's style of operation had been emptied the night after his disappearance. No one walked in to do it. The transaction came from a remote terminal with credentials that only the account holder should possess. Could Victor have accessed it himself from somewhere safe? Or had someone copied his most private codes? As investigators built timelines of these financial movements, a subtle pattern emerged. Every key transfer ended before dawn on the day following his vanishing. After that, the money trail went dead, as if someone closed the door from the inside. These discoveries sparked fierce debate inside the task force. Some officers argued that only Victor could have orchestrated such elegant timing. Others suspected a trusted aide or hidden partner had taken control. Either way, the financial labyrinth proved that someone had been preparing for weeks, if not months. And yet, even money can only tell part of the story. Bank records could not explain how the black Mercedes disappeared without a trace, or why close friends stayed silent about crucial hours. To solve that riddle, investigators would have to turn from numbers to people, those who shared Victor's table, rode in his cars, and perhaps betrayed his trust. The search for human motives now pointed inward, toward the very heart of his once loyal circle. In the next chapter, we follow that lead into dangerous territory, where friendship and ambition blur. The betrayal theory. The betrayal theory from the beginning, Victor built his world on loyalty. Friends became business partners, bodyguards turned into trusted messengers. For years, that tight circle gave him confidence to move freely through Moscow's unpredictable nights. But as investigators dug deeper, they began to suspect that the very network meant to keep him safe might have provided the key to his disappearance. The first hint came from a missing man. One of Victor's most reliable bodyguards, known for punctuality so precise that friends joked he ran on Swiss time, failed to show up for work 2 days after Victor vanished. Calls to his family went unanswered. Neighbors said he had packed a small bag and left at dawn. No tickets, no sightings, simply gone. Another close associate, a driver who often chauffeured Victor on late-night runs, was found weeks later in a remote wooded area. Officially, it was ruled an accident, but the scene raised quiet doubts. No clear skid marks on the nearby road, no sign of an animal crossing that might have forced a swerve. To detectives already haunted by gaps in the timeline, it felt like another disappearing thread. Inside Victor's crew, fear fed suspicion. Small disagreements turned into sharp arguments. Who had been with him that final night? Who knew about the black envelope passed to him at dinner? Stories kept shifting. One associate claimed that Victor had invited only 2 companions into the Mercedes. Another insisted there was a third person no one could identify. Without hard evidence, even the smallest contradiction felt heavy. Investigators followed every relationship back to its roots. They found old rivalries inside the group business ventures that had gone sour, disputes over hidden profits, jealousies over Victor's trust. Some men owed him large sums they could not repay. Others had ambitions to run their own operations and may have chafed under his calm but firm leadership. One telling discovery was a quiet series of cash withdrawals by a long-time lieutenant in the days leading up to the disappearance. Each withdrawal was small enough to avoid attention, but together they formed a significant sum. When questioned, the lieutenant offered vague explanations about family expenses and short-term investments. None of it quite fit. Rumors of secret side deals also surfaced. A warehouse manager whispered about a private meeting between 2 of Victor's senior aides and a known rival, held late at night and without Victor's knowledge. When confronted, the aides admitted only to business discussions, but their discomfort was plain. Even old friendships can carry sharp edges. Victor's generosity sometimes created quiet resentment. Some partners felt overshadowed, convinced they deserved a larger share of profits or more independence. In the volatile atmosphere of Moscow's criminal economy, those feelings could ignite with little warning. Still, betrayal on this scale required more than envy. It demanded planning and courage, or at least the promise of powerful protection. That thought brought investigators back to earlier suspicions of state involvement. Perhaps an ambitious insider struck a deal with outside forces, offering access to Victor in exchange for immunity or payment. Support for this theory came from an unexpected witness, a nightclub accountant who had handled Victor's evening cash flows. She recalled an argument she overheard days before he disappeared. Victor had been calm, but one of his key lieutenants raised his voice, insisting on a change in the arrangement. The accountant could not hear details, but she remembered the tension and the strange silence that followed when the meeting ended. Despite long hours of questioning and cross-checking, no confession emerged. Some men grew defensive, others almost tearful, but every story stopped short of proof. As one detective later said, it was like standing in a room full of closed doors. You knew one of them led to the truth, but every key turned to dust. Whether inside betrayal was the root cause or just one piece of a larger plan, it became clear that Victor's trusted circle was not as solid as it once seemed. People he had believed unshakable were already drifting away, hiding money, or vanishing entirely. And yet, even this theory could not explain the scattered reports that soon followed. Because just as suspicion settled on those closest to Victor, strange sightings began to surface, sightings that hinted he might still be alive, moving quietly beyond reach. Those eerie reports formed the heart of the next chapter, the ghost sightings. The ghost sightings weeks passed, and Moscow's rumor mill never rested. When no body appeared and no credible arrest was made, talk turned from murder to something stranger. People began to swear they had seen Victor alive, calm, and far from the dark streets where he was last known to be. The first claim came from a long-haul truck driver traveling through the Baltic states. He told a roadside cafe owner that he had shared a late-night coffee with a man who looked remarkably like Victor. The stranger, he said, wore a baseball cap pulled low and spoke fluent Russian with a faint southern accent. When shown a photo later, the driver hesitated, then nodded. "That's him," he said, "or his twin." Soon, similar stories multiplied. A businessman in Warsaw described a chance meeting with a Russian-speaking man at an airport lounge who paid cash for a ticket to Spain. A tourist in Cyprus insisted she saw Victor walking along a marina, deep in conversation on a satellite phone. Each account arrived wrapped in convincing details, specific times, local weather, even the brand of cigarettes the man was smoking. None of these sightings could be fully confirmed, yet they came from places Victor had once mentioned as ideal hideouts. Years earlier, over late dinners, he had admired southern Spain's quiet coves and Cyprus's easy banking laws. To those who knew him, the coincidences felt like breadcrumbs scattered on purpose. One report stirred particular excitement. In 2003, nearly a decade after he vanished, a grainy photograph surfaced from a Spanish seaside festival. It showed a man in sunglasses watching a street parade. The posture, the jawline, even the habit of holding a lighter in the left handle matched Victor. Investigators compared it with old images and admitted the resemblance was striking. But the photo was taken from too far away for certainty. Detectives also explored the possibility of deliberate misdirection. Could Victor have arranged doubles people who looked like him enough to spark confusion? Friends recalled that he once joked about rehearsing exits and even liked the idea of sending a lookalike to meetings when he wanted to avoid attention. What once seemed a joke now looked like foresight. Financial clues occasionally echoed these sightings. In the same years that new rumors emerged, dormant accounts connected to his network briefly flickered with small transactions, just enough to show life, then fell silent again. Each movement coincided with one of the alleged appearances, as if someone were checking in and then disappearing again. Family members kept their own counsel. Some quietly admitted they believed Victor might still be alive. They pointed to the absence of grief in certain carefully chosen words of his elderly mother, who once said simply, "My son always finds a way to call home," without explaining further. Others insisted these were only a parent's hopes. Not everyone welcomed these ghost stories. For law enforcement, each new rumor demanded resources letters to foreign agencies, comparisons of security footage, painstaking interviews with travelers who might recall a stranger's face. Again and again, the trail ended in shadows. For Victor's former associates, the sightings created a different kind of tension. If he truly lived abroad, he might one day return and reclaim his businesses. If he were playing a long game, any moves they made could later be judged as betrayal. Some held back investments, keeping cash liquid and plans vague, just in case the phone rang. Even those who dismissed the stories admitted they had a strange effect. Victor's name began to carry a mythic weight. He became not just a missing man, but a symbol of cunning survival, the outlaw who slipped every net. Popular culture picked up the theme songs about the man who walked through walls, novels featuring mysterious masterminds who never die. By the late 2000s, investigators had to accept a hard truth. The ghost sightings would never end them with a single, clean answer. Whether Victor himself arranged these appearances or whether people simply wanted to believe, the effect was the same. His absence turned into a living presence, shaping choices and fears long after he disappeared. Yet behind every legend lies some fragment of fact, and in the following decade, a quiet revolution in information began to shift the landscape. Archival documents once locked in steel cabinets slowly came to light. Among them were files that hinted at surveillance, covert contacts, and unrecorded operations. To see how these hidden papers reframed the mystery, we move next into Files Declassified. Files Declassified. More than 20 years after Victor's disappearance, a slow-moving bureaucratic change cracked open doors that had been locked since the chaotic 90s. A new wave of transparency laws required some long-sealed records to be reviewed, and if no longer considered sensitive, quietly released. Most of these declassified papers were dull routine memos, forgotten traffic citations, but among them, investigators found fragments that reignited the case. The first surprise came from an unremarkable cardboard file stamped with an old security agency seal. Inside were surveillance summaries describing Victor's movements in the months before he vanished. They weren't dramatic lists of car license plates, times of restaurant visits, notes on who joined his late-night meetings, but the dates told a bigger story. He had been under quiet observation for at least half a year, and crucially, those records stopped exactly one day before he disappeared. Why would a monitoring operation that careful simply end? Some analysts argued that it was routine. Perhaps his activities were judged unimportant. Others found that explanation far too neat. "In my experience," said one retired officer who reviewed the papers, "surveillance ends because an operation moves to a different phase, not because interest suddenly evaporates." More documents hinted at back-channel negotiations. Among faded telex messages was a single encrypted note marked Urgent Internal Coordination. Its decoded text mentioned a special meeting regarding Asset V, scheduled for the very evening Victor was last seen. No address, no participants, just that cryptic reference. Whether Asset V meant Victor or something entirely different remained a matter of debate, but the timing was hard to ignore. Investigators also discovered financial ledgers from state-owned enterprises that quietly intersected with Victor's offshore network. Tiny, easily missed notations like consulting facilitation CV file suggested that he might have helped move funds for semi-official projects. This lent weight to the theory that his business empire doubled as a discrete financial channel for people in power. Another revelation lay in phone logs. Hidden in a forgotten storage box were internal dispatch records from a special communications bureau. On the night of Victor's disappearance, a short, encrypted call was routed through that bureau to a number now traced to a decommissioned government facility. The connection lasted only 30 seconds. It never appeared in the original investigation's phone data. These finds did not provide a simple answer, but they changed the nature of the mystery. If Victor had been the target of a covert operation, whether for recruitment, protection, or elimination, the absence of evidence was no longer surprising. It might even have been deliberate. Yet the files also raised unsettling contradictions. A memo dated 3 weeks later recorded a senior investigator's comment, "No current interest in subject. Presume relocation or neutralization outside jurisdiction." The phrasing suggested that even then, officials were unsure whether Victor was alive. Relocation implied a managed extraction. Neutralization hinted at something final. The ambiguity seemed intentional. Journalists who later examined these documents found that key pages were missing. Paragraph numbers jumped unexpectedly, and several cross-referenced attachments were gone. Some believed those missing sections contained the real answers. Others thought they might have been blank placeholders all along, designed to mislead anyone who came looking decades later. For Victor's legend, these disclosures were gasoline on an old flame. Newspapers ran bold headlines. Secret police watched missing tycoon. Talk shows speculated about secret flights, hidden identities, and witness protection abroad. Every partial truth invited larger guesses, and Victor's name returned to the public stage stronger than before. Still, those closest to him remained cautious. Old friends spoke in careful half-sentences. If he wanted to leave, he left, one said. If not, nobody will ever find him. The declassified files proved only one thing beyond doubt. Powerful forces had intersected with Victor's life, and someone had gone to great lengths to keep the full story sealed. Even with these revelations, one question lingered. What does a man's absence mean when it becomes larger than his life? As the decades passed, Victor transformed from a missing figure into a cultural phantom, an idea reshaping music, literature, and even business folklore. To understand how his mystery continues to echo today, we move to the final chapter. Legacy of a Phantom. Legacy of a Phantom years have stretched into decades, yet Victor's absence still feels strangely alive. In Moscow's cafes and late-night taxi rides, his name drifts into conversations like a familiar melody. Younger generations know him less as a real person and more as a myth, a symbol of cunning survival in a turbulent era. For those who lived through the 90s, he remains the man who could make whole neighborhoods hold their breath, even after disappearing. The legend grew slowly, layer by layer. Musicians turned fragments of his story into lyrics about a ghost of the boulevards. Crime novelists borrowed his character, changing only a few details to avoid lawsuits. Television dramas featured mysterious masterminds who slipped past every trap, their silhouettes echoing Victor's sharp suit and quiet stare. Each retelling blurred the line between fact and imagination until the man and the myth were nearly the same. Businesses, too, felt his shadow. In certain markets, old merchants still use his name as shorthand for reliability. Do it like Victor, clean and quiet. Some property developers quietly reference his rumored methods of sealing a deal when they describe risk-free projects. Even startup founders, far removed from the criminal world, cite him as an example of strategic thinking, someone who saw patterns others missed and always stayed one step ahead. Family members have learned to live with questions they cannot answer. Over the years, they've given only rare interviews, speaking of a son or brother who was born to find his own road. They never hold memorial services, never use the word late. In their homes, his photos remain in plain sight, as if he might walk in for tea at any moment. That quiet refusal to close the story feeds the sense that his journey continues somewhere unseen. The official files, even after partial declassification, leave space for endless speculation. Some investigators lean toward the theory of a meticulously planned escape, pointing to the orchestrated money transfers and scattered international sightings. Others remain convinced of a covert state operation, hidden by layers of paperwork and silence. A smaller, more philosophical group suggests the truth might be both. Victor could have collaborated in his own disappearance, using official secrecy as the final cover. Outside Russia, the mystery also resonates. In Spain, Cyprus, and the Baltics, journalists still check old hotel ledgers and marina logs when a tip arrives. From time to time, a photo surfaces, someone in a crowd, a chance reflection in a shop window reviving debate. None has ever been confirmed, but each adds a fresh thread to the tapestry. For those who study organized crime, Victor's story became a cautionary tale. His empire showed how personal charisma and flexible alliances could build vast influence quickly. His vanishing proved how fragile even the strongest networks are when faced with deeper, hidden powers or with a man's own desire to outwit them all. In a way, Victor achieved a form of immortality. By disappearing without leaving proof of life or death, he placed himself beyond the ordinary rules of time and memory. People project onto him their own ideas, freedom, cleverness, rebellion, even a strange kind of heroism. His story continues to adapt, absorbing new rumors and fresh generations of listeners. Yet beneath the myth runs a quieter, human current. Friends who once shared late-night dinners still set an extra glass when they meet. Some admit they sometimes sense him nearby, as if a familiar presence lingers just outside the circle of light. Whether that feeling is memory or something more, they prefer not to question it. And so, the mystery stands. Victor's rise captured the fever of the 90s. His disappearance froze a city in wonder, and his legend still moves through streets and stories like a hidden river. We began with a single black Mercedes vanishing into the night. We end with an enigma that refuses to fade, a life that turned absence into power. The files may grow, the theories may shift, but the man remains a shadow on the skyline, proof that in some stories, the unanswered question is the final, lasting answer.